Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we are finally here. After all these years, I am finally reviewing the very first JRPG that I ever played. For a bit of context, I was about 11 years old when I first played this classic. Having watched my childhood friend play through a bit of FF7, I kinda knew what I was getting into, but I had no idea how obsessed I would get, not only with this game, but eventually the genre as a whole. FF8 was my gateway drug into JRPGs, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Over the 5 or 6 years that followed, I went back to play FF8 half a dozen times, but for some reason didn't touch it again until now, nearly 20 years later. Now, that's a really long time, but I somehow remember more about its finer mechanics than the games I played only a few months ago. Final Fantasy VIII has been out for 25 years now, so the question remains, is it still good today? For this review, I'll be playing the HD Remaster version on the Switch, which was released in 2019. Before we get into it, it would help out this channel as well as Zell's hot dog addiction to hit that like button and sub for more JRPG content coming soon. And what did you think of FF8? I know it's a title that initially divided fans, but I get the impression that more and more people have warmed up to it over the years. Let me know in the comments below. Alright, let's get into it. Before we get into the meat of the core game, let's start by talking about the quality of the remaster. Final Fantasy VIII may be 25 years old, but its cinematics are still beautiful. I mean, this opening FMV sequence was so incredible back then, and it still is. Watching Squall and Seifer battle it out to ffviii is something that will never get old. But this beauty can only be found on the surface. Where FF8 was a graphical masterclass back in 1999, this remaster does not follow suit. Now, the character models have had clear HD upgrades and they do look great. Squall, you really are the best looking guy here. You have come a long way. That Wall, on the other hand, has not. These backgrounds are blurry. The contrast between the great looking character models and their bitch-ass blurry backgrounds look horrendous. Let's take the class from Bellum for instance. Okay, she's real. She's just part of the background. Real. Background. Real. Really? With the amount of automated AI upscaling tools out there, I really don't understand why something wasn't done here. And while I'm complaining about the Remaster Additions, who the f decided to add an exit button on the bottom of the menu? When I wanted to save, my 20-year-old muscle memory made me press up and select, leading me to exit the game and lose all progress rather than select save. I also noticed some slight delays with the button inputs, and there were also some frame rate drops, which is absolutely crazy considering that this is an old game on modern hardware. But this remaster isn't all bad. There are some very useful quality of life additions that can be toggled on and off at any time with the analog sticks. One of them triples the game speed, which is very useful when grinding. Another makes you invincible, which is something I'm never a fan of. And the other, it turns off all random encounters, which is also very useful. On that note, the encounter rate seems way higher than it used to be, especially on the world map. Would any of you agree with this? To sum up the quality of the recent remaster, there are a couple of things that make the experience better, but also other things that make the experience worse than the original. But something that has always remained absolutely perfection is the soundtrack. Final Fantasy VIII has one of my favourite soundtracks of all time. Tracks like The Landing, Liberi Fratelli, The Man with the Machine Gun, and Eyes on Me have been living in my head for the past 2 decades, and I have no doubt they'll be there for at least 20 more. FF8 follows Squall Leonhardt and his party of Seeds, who are specialised mercenaries with the main goal of defeating sorceresses. The early parts of the game involve the group taking on missions to ultimately stop a sorceress named Edea, who has seized control over Galbadia and will stop at nothing to achieve her goals. The later parts of the game, well, let's just say it gets a bit more complicated than that thanks to some good old-fashioned time travel. Add to this the dreamlike states that the party occasionally fall into, causing them to all dream about the same past events featuring Laguna and his crew, and you have even more mysteries to get your head around. Put simply, I have always been a massive fan of this story, and all this time later, nothing has changed. Now, while the writing can be a tad questionable at times, there are some absolutely amazing moments, such as the epic garden battle and the emotional scenes between Squall and Renoa up in space. I mean, I even had a save file for the latter, just so I could revisit this moment and listen to Eyes on Me whenever I wanted. And you know, this was kind of a big deal too, since the memory card only had 15 slots. The colourful cast of characters also feel like a bunch of old friends who I haven't seen since my high school days. I love the way my old pal Squall grows into a leader and how his relationship with Renoa builds through the course of the game. And my BFF Laguna, he is one of the greatest characters in the game and is in desperate need of more screen time. And the class clown Zell, who, loves hot dogs, and instructor Trape. Wait, I still don't understand how Quistis can be a teacher. I've been a teacher for 15 years and I can confirm that teachers do not look like this. Teachers also aren't 19 and flirt with their students. Schoolmasters also don't look like Nog, so I guess the whole fantasy part of Final Fantasy does check out. Truth be told, while some of the characters that accompany Squall aren't as deep as some of the other casts from JRPGs released around the same time, they are still lovable in their own ways. Final Fantasy VIII has a similar ATB combat system to FF7, but with a few core changes. To start with, there is no longer MP. Magic spells are instead stocked by characters, and if you run out, you have to obtain more. Then there's limit breaks, which now have a chance to activate when a character's HP is low. This is a risk-reward system, and one that I almost always risked by going into battle with low HP. Using limit breaks is the best part of the combat, and most of these are interactive and completely unique to each character. Squall's Renzakuken, for example, requires you to time multiple gunblade attacks. This is preceded by the chance to activate a powerful finishing move that you've previously learnt through upgrading his gunblade. And when you activate Lionheart, wowee, this puts Omnislash to shame. And if you've played through FF8, you will know that you can abuse this limit break system. By pressing the switch button, you can cycle through characters' turns, which means that the limit break activation RNG will be reset. Essentially, every turn that I had low HP, I would just spam this button until a character's limit break option appeared. While it is a lot of fun doing this since limit breaks are really awesome, I've always wondered if it was an intentional design choice, as the game would be so much harder without being able to abuse the system. Surprisingly, I've never really talked to anyone else about this, so let me know your thoughts on this system in the comments below. Another major feature of the combat is summoning Guardian Forces, known as GFs. When you select one, they'll take a while to summon, but they also have their own HP amount, which protects your character's HP if you're attacked while summoning. These animations are lengthy, but they can do decent damage to all enemies and are very useful early in the game. However, after a certain point, I stopped using them because it was way more efficient to simply attack. You can also change things up a little by setting unique GF abilities as command character abilities, such as Mad Rush, which grants Berserk, Haste, and Protect on all allies. I've always felt that it would have been nice to have an extra command slot here, since it means removing another one of the main options of item, GF, draw, or magic. The major RPG mechanic to increase your character's strength is the Junction System. As you obtain GFs through the game, they will learn a range of abilities to help you out in battle. Some of these are junctioning abilities which are required to increase your character's stats. For instance, by equipping Shiva to a character and having her learn Strength J, Vit J, and Spirit J, that character will be able to junction their magic spells to the Strength stat, the Vitality stat, and the Spirit stat. There's a few factors to consider here, including the amount of magic you're equipping and also the type of magic itself. For example, equipping 100 cure spells to your hit point stat will raise it by a lot more than if you chose 100 fire spells. What this also means is that if you choose to use a junctioned magic spell in battle, that stat will decrease as the amount of magic equipped to it has been reduced. While I've never liked this mechanic, it does encourage the careful selection of which spells to use, but to be honest, I've always found offensive magic way less useful than physically attacking. One thing that I will say is that obtaining GFs is so incredibly important in raising characters' strengths due to the many abilities that they provide. If you don't want to miss out on the crazy amount of options provided by this complex system, then I would suggest looking up where to find them, as many of them are missable until very late in the game. If you know how to obtain good magic through refining and learn the right abilities with your GFs as soon as possible, you can become very overpowered very early in the game. This junction system was very hit and miss with fans. Some people absolutely love it, some find it too complicated, and some don't understand how it works at all. It certainly isn't for everyone, but I love tinkering with my GFs, their abilities, and my junctions, and there is so much that can be done here. Fun fact, the first time I played this game when I was 11, I remember getting to the Disc 3 end boss with only 4 or 5 GFs without junctioning anything to my stats. I relied on abusing GF attacks, but that would only go so far, and it was at that point that I realized I was doing something wrong. Now it's time to address the two major elephants in the room. These are two major criticisms regarding the game's mechanics. Both of these, I feel, fundamentally come down to a lack of understanding regarding how these core mechanics are intended to work. First is the draw system. The idea here is that you can use the draw command to stock magic, both from draw points stationed around the world and from enemies. If you want 100 of every magic spell, you'll need to spend a lot of time doing this in battle. Yeah, I agree, this was a pretty piss poor design choice. But after the first several hours of the game, there becomes a much more efficient way to learn magic, and this was clearly the intended way to create magic. After a GF learns a certain refining ability, you're able to instantly turn your items into magic. For example, you can learn Life Magic Refine learned by a Siren to convert 10 tenths into 100 Kuraga spells. Doing this takes about 5 seconds and provides you with a far stronger healing spell than most monsters carry for the majority of the game. This refining system is actually really cool. Every time a GF learnt a new refining ability, or every time I got a new item, I raced over to these menus to see what I could learn. Another common criticism is that enemies level up with you, but I feel that it works really well in the context of the game. If you were to not use the junction system at all to increase your stats, yeah, it would be an issue. However, the majority of your character's strengths comes from the junction system, not through basic levels. Junctioning is the single most important factor in strengthening your characters. Whether your level is low or high, you will powerhouse your way through the game if you've made good use of this system. Before we wrap up this review, I've got to give praise to the amount of optional content. The Final Fantasy series was on fire during this era, and FF8 is no exception. There are a load of side quests and other things to do hidden throughout the world, and if the number of secret dungeons and optional GFs to find isn't enough for you, let me introduce you to Triad. This card game was awesome back then, and all these years later, nothing has changed. While the actual game mechanics are fairly simple, there is a lot to it. There are various side quests and different regional rules, not to mention a crazy amount of cards to collect. Also, this little gold star will appear in the menu. Traveling around the world and uncovering all of its secrets is awesome. Triad is awesome. Final Fantasy VIII is awesome. Final Fantasy VIII is just as I remembered it, and this recent playthrough confirms why I've always held it in such high regard. This was the first RPG I ever played, and to me, it's still one of the best. The number one thing I love about FF8 is its story and its characters. There are some incredibly awesome moments that have stuck with me all this time. It is really hard to break away from this excellent story, but when you do, there is a lot of awesome things to do and discover throughout the vast world. The main thing here is Triad, which remains one of the best RPG minigames of all time. The soundtrack is another standout feature. There are few video games out there that have had such a large amount of quality, timeless tracks. I also really love the complexities and control you're given through the Junction System. I know it's not for everyone, but I'm a guy who loves to tinker, and a lot of tinkering can be done here. But if there's one thing I have never been a fan of, it is the draw system. While there are better options to obtain magic, the whole concept of magic usage causing a reduction in your stats has never sat right with me. The PS1 version of FF8 is a masterpiece, and while not perfect, I truly believe it to be one of the best games of all time. But this HD remaster unfortunately leaves a lot to be desired. Being able to speed up and turn off random encounters is really nice, but the contrast of the HD character models on blurry backgrounds is one of the worst modern design choices I've ever seen in a video game. It is that bad. So, is this HD version the best way to experience FF8? Maybe not. But if it's all you have access to, you should absolutely play it and see for yourself why FF8 is so highly regarded by most. What do you think of Final Fantasy VIII? What's your story with this classic? Let me know in the comments below. This was Hellfire RPGs, thanks for watching. If you like this video, hit the like button and sub for more JRPG content coming soon. See you next time.